Hello, thank you for joining us for Unite for Sight's webinar about perfecting the pitch. We are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Jennifer Staple-Clark, and I'm founder and Chief Executive Officer of Unite for Sight. I will briefly introduce you to Unite for Sight and then review the webinar logistics, and then we will hear from our 4 expert panelists. Unite for Sight is a global health nonprofit organization that promotes high-quality care for all. We offer extensive global health and social entrepreneurship education programs. Our Global Health University program offers a free webinar series, including today's webinar, and we also offer 20 online certificate programs for students and professionals. Many students receive academic credit for completion of these certificates, and professionals often pursue the certificates for professional development. The certificate topics range from a certificate in global health and a certificate in cultural competency to a certificate in responsible NGO management, as well as 17 other online certificate programs as well. And we have additional upcoming webinars during April, and we have one confirmed and scheduled for April 28th about perspectives on health for vulnerable populations. And then we'll take a short hiatus for webinars during the summer, but then begin again holding typically monthly webinars again starting next September. And we encourage you to register for these free upcoming webinars at uniteforsight.org/webinars. Additional educational opportunities for students and professionals includes participation in Unite for Sight's annual Global Health and Social Entrepreneurship events, which focus on responsible global engagement, and our 13th annual Global Health and Innovation Conference, which is the world's largest global health and social entrepreneurship conference, will be in just over 3 weeks on April 16th and 17th at Yale University. And this conference includes 300 presentations and more than 2,000 participants for a weekend exchange of ideas across all disciplines of global health, international development, and social entrepreneurship. The conference website and registration can be seen at uniteforsight.org/conference. And this annual conference also includes an innovation prize, which includes a $10,000 and a $2,000 cash prize to the 2 best pitch presentations at the conference in April. And this innovation prize supports outstanding ideas, programs, and organizations which are locally developed and locally responsible. Applications were accepted for this innovation prize for the semifinalist round on a rolling application basis. And those applications for this upcoming event in April are currently closed, but it's an annual innovation prize. And for those who are not presenting this year, we encourage you to consider applying and presenting and participating for the 2017 conference next year. In addition to these activities already discussed, we also have a healthcare delivery program that provides care to patients living in extreme poverty. And we partner with phenomenal local eye clinics in Ghana, Honduras, and India to provide quality eye care to patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. And these programs are locally led and managed by local medical professionals. And our collaboration has provided eye care to more than 2 million people by local doctors during the past decade, including more than 95,000 sight-restoring surgeries by local ophthalmologists to date. Unite for Sight is the world's only organization that is a healthcare delivery organization that additionally offers immersive global health education and social entrepreneurship opportunities for students and professionals. And specifically, participants support and learn from local doctors in Ghana, Honduras, and India as those local doctors provide care to the patients living in poverty. And participants learn from those local doctors about patient barriers to care and about effective strategies to reach the hardest to reach patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. And the local doctors are incredible social entrepreneurs who design effective and innovative strategies to eliminate these patient barriers to care. Now I will describe for you the basic logistics of the webinar, and we are so delighted to have all of you with us here today. We have 4 incredible panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. Each of our panelists today will start by giving a 2-minute introduction about themselves and their current role, and offer their key guidance and lesson learned about pitch presentations. And then we will dedicate the remaining time to your answers. We received stellar questions already submitted from you, our audience, by Tuesday's question submission deadline, and we selected the most common and most thoughtful questions to ask our panelists today. We also invite you to submit additional questions in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and then we will select additional questions today to ask our panelists as well. We also encourage you to tweet about the webinar, including your key lessons learned, by using the hashtag GHUWebinar, and you can see that hashtag in the webinar visuals on your screen. Now we will proceed with having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, David Barash. David, please begin by introducing yourself, your background, and current role, and please share your key guidance and lessons learned regarding pitch presentations.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I first of all appreciate the offer to speak here today and to be part of this great webinar and to be part of this terrific panel. First of all, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself and my current role, and then a couple of tips that I've learned along the way around pitches. My current role is I'm the Chief Medical Officer and Executive Director of Global Health of the GE Foundation. I've been in this role for about 3 years, and prior to that was the Chief Medical Officer for one of the divisions at GE Healthcare called Life Care Solutions. My background is that I'm an emergency physician. I've been practicing emergency medicine now for about 30 years, and started off the first half of my career in emergency department management, emergency department care and emergency department management, where I was responsible for running emergency departments in the northeastern part of the United States. And then around 20 years ago, began getting involved in the technology of medicine and development and commercialization of technology going forward. And it's there where I really learned how to pitch. And I'd have to say, both as a pitcher and as someone who receives pitches, the most important thing to me, and the thing that I think that everyone should really focus on, is why your pitch is important to the audience and to yourself. And many people talk about the why, what, and the how of stories and programs and pitches. I think the why is the most important. Think about your audience, why they're going to care. Think about the story and why it's important to you, and think about your story and why the audience would like to hear it. The second thing is the what, and I think it's important to touch on the what and what the substance of your pitch is, what the substance of your program is. And then the last thing is the how, and quite frankly, in doing a short pitch, like a 2-minute pitch, I wouldn't spend too much time on the how. It will leave your audience with some questions. It will leave them with the opportunity to ask more, to think about more. And when they do ask those questions, it will leave you with the opportunity to then call them to action and to ask them for what you really need from them when you're doing your pitch. So I'll stop there, Jennifer, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of great questions and discussion from here.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. And James Nardella, please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm James Nardella. I am also glad to be on this call with such great people. I currently serve as a principal at the Skoll Foundation, a principal for the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship, and my responsibility here at Skoll is to identify organizations that have a potential to drive large-scale social change and to screen those organizations for the award. And then I work with a group of current awardees in a portfolio and contribute to thought leadership in the field of social entrepreneurship. But I've only been here at Skoll for 6 months, and prior to that, I was the executive director of the Lawala Community Alliance, which is a health and development organization affiliated with Vanderbilt University. And we were targeting a rural population with acute needs in Western Kenya, trying to increase child survival, improve access to primary health care, and increase school completion rates specifically for girls. And I led that organization from its startup to, I would say, its adolescence, and had a lot of experience pitching there, both for funders. We had to raise just over $2 million a year, and also articulating the vision and voice of the organization through its external outlets online and through the media. So I think the biggest thing that I have to share from that experience, and even my experience here at Skoll of listening to lots of pitches, is somewhat similar to what David said, which is thinking about your audience. But I would just specify that and say, in pitching, we have to pursue interaction, something mutual with the audience, because it's not about you. If it were about you, you would be giving this pitch in a room by yourself. And often when we're preparing to speak in front of others, we're very self-focused. How am I going to perform? And I don't think that that's actually the issue. I think really what we're daring to risk is some sort of interaction, some sort of mutual need. Either you want to recruit people to join your team, you want to get them to vote for you, you want to motivate them to invest in your venture, you want them to be inspired to become an advocate for the kind of work that you believe in, you want to challenge them to see the world differently, but it requires some sort of interaction that you could either win on or fail on. And so throughout your pitch, you're actually dependent upon the audience for something, and it's a mutual dependency. And I would say the pitches that I've seen that have been highly successful are the pitches where that mutual interaction is actually an offering, not just a sale for the organization that's being presented, but a thought offering, something offered up into the field. So I think about one of the Skoll awardees that I recently saw a pitch from, which is Village Reach. And they came to us and offered, an update on their organization's development and their accomplishments, but they framed the entire thing as a thought exercise around what does it actually take to drive large-scale systems change, to move from doing it and proving it in one place to scaling your impact to multiple countries and then promoting what you're doing out to other actors who might take up your innovation. And they actually offered that to us as a kind of mutual learning. And so I walked out of that pitch feeling like I had been given something, not just that I had been sold something. And so that's what I would say, pursue a mutual interaction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. And Daniela, Papi-Thornton, please introduce yourself and also share your key lessons learned as well.
Sure. Hi, my name is Daniela. I am currently the Deputy Director at the Skoll Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Hi, James. Over here in the UK, inside business school. I actually just sat through an entire day of student pitches, so I have a lot of feedback from that experience and having watched quite a number of others over the years. But before that, I led an entrepreneurial venture myself, so I have a lot of pitch learning from my own failures and successes in having done some pitching of the organization that I founded. I also recently wrote a report called Tackling Heropreneurship, which kind of relates to some of the pieces of advice that I'll give as well. So just to be contrarian and to create a little debate in our panel, I'm going to disagree with David and say I think you don't need, he's right, you don't need to get into the how. You don't need to get into the details, and some really boring pitches can just get too into the weeds of how. But I do think it's really important that you have justifications of some of the assumptions that you're putting forth. For example, a lot of them, especially MBAs, will do some calculated, math calculations around the size of the market, and then they'll get down and say, this is how big we think the market is, and then they'll say, and if we just get 1% of the market, that means we'll have $1 million of revenue, right? So actually, the size of the market doesn't matter. It's how do you think you could get that? Why do you think you could? How would you do that? How are you going to compete in that sector, in that field? How are you going to solve this problem that others have tried to solve and perhaps unsuccessfully? So I think at least alluding to how your how is different and making sure you can really dig into those details if and when people ask. And the other piece of that is I would say, and this kind of agreeing with what we just heard already, is just really kind of knowing your audience and knowing when to go to certain people and when to ask. Because for some people, you might only get one shot, right? So making sure that when you go to that person, you might be saying, hey, I just like feedback on this. Or, hey, at the stage I think you might invest in, that's maybe 6 to 9 months from now because we're doing a prototype, but I'd just love to let you know what we care about and keep you on our radar. So keeping your audience in mind and the right time to pitch them and what to ask for is important as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Daniela. And our final panelist, Jenna Rogers-Rafferty, please introduce yourself and share your lessons learned as well.
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Jenna Rogers-Rafferty. We're representing KickStart International. And for those of you who are not familiar with our work, we are one of the early nonprofit social enterprises, actually a very proud member of the Skoll network of social entrepreneurs, celebrating our 25th year in operation with our mission to lift millions of people in Africa out of poverty quickly, cost-effectively, and sustainably. As a social enterprise, we do this through a business of designing, promoting, and actually selling very affordable irrigation pumps that enable poor farmers to make a lot more money. As a social enterprise, many of the farmers who have bought one of our pumps, there are now over 280,000 to date, many of whom have used it to start a profitable business. They don't even know that KickStart is a nonprofit and that people like me are fundraising to subsidize the cost of this item that they saw in a local shop somewhere in Kenya and now in 16 countries across sub-Saharan Africa. But that is, in fact, my role at KickStart, which is managing and presenting our work to foundations and corporate donors and maintaining our relationships with these types of supporters. So my formal background is in international development and economics, but I spent most of my career establishing startups. So I was very often a fundraiser out of necessity and refined my pitching in the process and realized that I actually really liked that aspect of the work, which has led me to join KickStart's team. And my best advice is now, as the last person, going to reiterate a lot of the great things that have already come up. Most similar to James's advice of never thinking of your pitch as being one-sided. I always have had the most success when framing a pitch as an opportunity more than an ask. An opportunity for somebody to get involved in something that's meaningful, that's exciting, that's effective, that's very much a two-way street rather than focusing on the need, especially because I'm most often pitching with the aim of getting some sort of financial support. But making sure that it's never just an ask, it's always this two-sided relationship, or I like how James put it, as an interaction that makes somebody excited about what they're gaining from it, not just giving. On top of that, I would add the total cliche that my most successful pitches have always been backed by my own belief in what I'm pitching. I think that that's a cliche for a reason. This, speaking from the heart is often the best way to be fully prepared to answer any potential questions that might come out of the very short opportunity that you're given.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. As you heard, they have a great wealth of expertise and guidance to share today. And now we will proceed with the question and answer session. As mentioned, we received questions in advance from you, our audience members, by Tuesday's question submission deadline. But if you have additional questions, please post them in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and we will add additional questions as well. For our first question for James, looking back, what would you tell your younger self about the essentials of a pitch?
Well, I started out my career maybe a little bit less in this territory than others, a little bit unorthodox. I studied theater as an undergrad, and I think one thing that comes out of that work of being in the theater is really trying to speak from your natural voice and not a speaking voice. And so we've all heard preachers who sound like preachers, or we've heard politicians who sound like politicians, and it has a certain air of inauthenticity in it. And I wish probably as I was pursuing building support for Lawala in its early days, I had just had more guts to really just be my real self and to sound like my real self, to not try to sound more sophisticated or more articulate than I actually am, because it sounds false, and we are unlikely to give our full trust to anyone who sounds false. So an exercise that I would do with myself to get this right was that I would sit down with a friend in a normal conversation, about maybe a good weekend my family and I had just had, or a trip that I had taken with a friend, and tell that story. And then I would move to a story about a meaningful interaction with a beneficiary from our work in Lawala, and then maybe slip directly into a pitch and see if my voice would change. Trusting that my real tone of voice is actually interesting, and if you change tones to some other tone that is not your own, then I would just go back to that initial conversation of, my friend would say, tell me about that weekend again. You're starting to sound artificial, James. And I would go back and share that story and try to get back into actually speaking for myself. And I think because we're all under sort of watchful, eyes, that we think that the world is always judging us, and probably the most important thing we can do is just be our authentic selves. And I really saw at times where the most effective pitches I gave for Lawala were the ones where I really admitted our struggles and the things that we didn't know, and people would compliment that and then offer to support us. And that really leans back on this fact that speaking from our natural voices means the most.
Great. Thank you so much, James. And David, what are the most common pitfalls that you have seen with pitches?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I think that's a great question. I would say there's lots of pitfalls. Unfortunately, there are many issues that folks get into with pitches because it's a moment of anxiety. But one of the things that I see, in large part because of that anxiety, is that pitchers tend to want to get too much into their short period of time that they have to pitch, whether it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 20 minutes. We're always trying to get every last detail we possibly can into that pitch. And I think it's really important to simplify the pitches, to take a lot of the text out, both verbal text and visual text out of your pitches, and to really maintain a clear focus on the message you're trying to leave at the end. Leave a clear focus on what you want the call to action be at the end, or the clear next step to be at the end of the pitch. And I think, to the point that was made earlier, the conference. To the point that was made earlier about my point about not focusing too much on the how, is really that's where I think people get bogged down in the details, that the how becomes a very detailed-oriented execution plan. And when you're forced to put that in there, you wind up pushing too much into the time rather than focusing on the simple, why do we care, what are we going to do, and very briefly how we get there. Keep it simple, keep the text down, and keep your focus.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. And our next question for James, what should a presenter do to ensure that they are communicating well and clearly?
I think that the main thing that I really believe in is essentially that you need to lace together impact and evidence with story. Sometimes I've seen presenters lean too heavily on anecdotal stories of a particular beneficiary in the field that has almost like a testimonial of how this person has affected them and what the transformation that they've seen in that individual life. Or they've leaned very heavily on evidence and data to the extent that it becomes so scientific that we kind of stop paying attention. And I think I remember seeing a presentation by Mark Klein, the head of BIPI, the Baylor Institute of Pediatric AIDS. And he does this wonderful job of weaving in the story of an individual child who's surviving HIV with the meaningful statistics and science of their work. And that brought great clarity for me, that I was able to attach to an actual story, a human being, but it wasn't distracting from the actual evidence basis and the impact, because ultimately, most of the time we're pitching because we want financial support, to be frank, for the work that we're doing. And people need to keep in mind that it's impact that leads to revenue. It's not the other way around. It's not revenue leads to impact. A lot of people think if only I could raise some money, I could go do some good in the world. I think the onus is on the leader to say, I've done this good, here's proof of it, and if I had some more funding, this is what I could get done. So I think finding a way to show that impact with both story and statistics weaved together.
Terrific. Thank you, James. And Jenna, what are lesser-known qualities that are most helpful for a successful pitch?
Gosh, I think so many of these have come up, and I've even already learned a lot myself. I think we've heard the term know your audience a lot and how that's a key to a successful pitch. I think it's also important to kind of add to that you should never expect your audience to be everybody. You have to have a recognition to begin with that what you're pitching isn't going to appeal to the public and that isn't what you're trying to do. You need to know who it is going to appeal to, basically who your people are, and narrowing it down and kind of seeing it almost, and I often think of it in the terms of an economist, as your opportunity cost, what you're going to leave on the table by focusing on something more closely and particularly. I think that with pitches, that's especially important and ties a lot back into something that I believe it was David that just said, keeping it simple, that you can't try to pack in everything. So you need to focus on one audience and one message that you're trying to get across to that audience in order to have the most success.
Great. Thank you so much. And Daniela, when a pitch is rejected, how should one evaluate to further evolve or perfect the pitch for the future?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is obviously always to ask for feedback. So hopefully, sometimes you just have to keep in mind, sometimes you might be rejected because they're not a right fit for you, right? Like a social investor shouldn't just be giving you money because they like your idea. They should be giving you money if they like your idea and they're the best source of money to help you get further, right? So, that could just be a misalignment. And so just making sure that you understand not only how can I improve my pitch, but how can I make sure I'm pitching it to the right people who have the right fit, with what we're asking for, the right philanthropists, the right investors, whatever that is. So I would definitely ask for feedback. I would also, it's confirmation bias. Sometimes it's our own. We know if you're the entrepreneur or the person who's pitching for funding, whatever that is, you probably know so much about the issue and the organization and what it is that you're pitching that sometimes you can not be the right judge of if the content that you're giving is of value because you know so much. You need to pitch it to someone who maybe knows nothing about the sector that you're in, and maybe you need to pitch it to a variety of people who have different levels of understanding. And then really what I tell my students is when they get feedback, so when I work with a class of students like the group that I was with today, I just tell them they have to listen but they can't respond because so often they want to defend or they want to say, oh, the reason I didn't add that in was because of whatever. So just shut up and listen, take the feedback, and acknowledge and honor that, that's what that person heard in the pitch. It might not have been what you meant for them to hear, but that's what they heard. So how can you shift what you say next time so that they understand the full meaning of what you were trying to say? And that's the hard thing is really just understanding where our own biases are leaving us with, areas where we think it's so obvious because we know it so well. It's just being really open to that feedback.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Daniela. And David, should a pitch be memorized? And if yes, how can it be presented in a way that it doesn't appear to be scripted?
That's a great question. Well, I think, that's a lot of the way that you memorize and the way you present well, I should say the way you memorize will determine how you present it. If you memorize word for word what you want to try to say, it will come out as scripted. If you memorize the flow of what you want to say, almost visually create a map of what you want to say, commit to memory the concepts and the points that you want to make, commit to memory the feeling that you want to have in engaging with the audience, then I think it will come out as genuine, as personal, as passionate. But if you memorize word for word what you're going to try to say, oftentimes you're right then, it will come out as scripted. And I think a little bit of what James was talking about earlier is, think about it as you're telling a story to a friend about the weekend that you just had, rather than a script that one might deliver in a speech. Think about it as I don't necessarily want to call it a conversation with the audience, but really an engagement with the audience. Memorize what it's going to feel like to have that engagement, visualize it, and it'll come out well without feeling too scripted.
Great. Thank you, David. And another question for you, David. How should visuals be incorporated into a successful pitch?
It's a great question. So I think the visuals should be complementary to your pitch. In fact, some of the best pitches you will ever see or hear don't have visuals, because it's about the story and about the passion and about what you have to say rather than your visuals. If you have a visual, it should be complementary. So as an example, if you're telling a personal story, one that has some human components to it, have a photograph there. If you're talking about children who are starving or other people who are suffering, have a visual there, have a picture there that tells that story. If you're talking about data, have a simple graph or a simple chart that shows the data. Not a lot of text on it, just the visual. If you're talking about a process or a new program, have just the key elements of that process or program on there. Again, thinking about it as the complement to what you're saying, not the text of what you're actually saying. We've all seen many presentations where the full text of what you're saying is in bullets on the slide, and I think that actually is very distracting and really loses the passion of what you're trying to say and actually loses your audience.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. And James, how should a pitch presenter balance humility with a confident presentation, especially when presenting a health idea for an international setting that we all know may need to evolve once tried in the field?
Yeah, I think that we should be careful not to overstate what we've done and what we know. And like I mentioned earlier, I actually think that there's tremendous benefit from people sharing not just what their work is accomplishing. At Lawala, we would often talk about our ability to raise skilled delivery rates in rural Kenya, but we would have to admit as well that we had difficulty getting women to come in for early entrance to antenatal care. And being able to talk about the struggles in the work and why those exist, and, frankly, some of the challenges of just keeping staff engaged and employed in such a rural place, that actually helps bring reality to the work. And I don't think that it benefits any of us to have people overstate what they're doing. And I would say, frankly, I've seen a number of times when I've been at pitches for sort of graduate business school competitions where I feel like there's a grandiose overstatement of what the projects that are being pitched will accomplish, and often when they're in the early stage. And it really limits my ability to follow their story and believe in the work, because it seems to just deny that there's any complexity or shades of gray in what might happen when these ideas hit the real world.
Great, James. Thank you. And Daniela, what is the typical amount of time that a pitch should last? When do you know when to stop?
I think that is going to be something you play by ear. I mean, you might be pitching in an elevator literally when you have 1 minute of someone's time because that's what they gave you. I think you need to be able to pitch in 30 seconds, in 5 minutes, if they want to give you more time, in 20 minutes. So that you're just going to have to play by ear. If you're actually pitching to foundation, to an investor, ask them and they'll probably tell you what they're looking for. And what I would recommend is if they give you a certain slot of time, like if they've told you they have 20 minutes, don't use your 20 minutes for the pitch, right? Use 5 minutes for the pitch, and then do the rest for Q&A, because you don't want to take all the time with you speaking. You want to make sure you get to the things that they want to know.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And a question for Jenna. What do you do when you are asked a question that you don't have an answer to?
That is a great question. I think that it's always best, if you really don't know the answer, to just frankly begin your best guess by saying, that's a great question, and I really don't know the answer, but I would begin approaching it by, and then, kind of give it your most informed stab, and that this is a place where, once again, knowing your audience can be what you use to best craft a response that isn't sounding like a total cop-out, but also isn't going to come off as BS, and, it's definitely not going to make any claims that are actually not true or that you have no reason to believe or make in the first place. I think that integrity of saying, and admitting where you don't know an answer is often very valuable and frank and real, and I think that people are drawn to that, much like a lot of the other panelists have talked about how authenticity goes so much further than something that's rehearsed. And, acknowledging what you don't know is often as important as really confidently stating what you do know.
Jennifer, this is David. Can I add to that a little bit? Because I think it's a great answer.
Please.
I'd love to just add one other comment to that, which is I agree. First of all, be genuine, be candid, say what you don't know. Say you're going to give your best answer, but then also say, let me get back to you on this. Let me do some more research and I can get back to you or talk to my colleagues. Or that way it does two things. One is it says you're interested in the question and you want to try to get a real answer for them, but it also keeps the discussion going. It gives you another touch point when you do get back to them with that answer.
Yeah, that is thank you, David. That is a great addition, because you always want to, I think, be aware of the next step that you're trying to pursue and any reason to keep it going. He's really highlighted how not knowing something might actually be an opportunity to get to have another conversation or to get to send them an email that's not just a cold follow-up that says, I looked into this question and got back as promised. So thank you, David. That I couldn't agree more.
Fabulous. Thank you. And David, how do you prevent a pitch from becoming a boring checklist presentation? And also, what are the best complementary aids to your pitch? Should people bring business cards, infographics, concept notes, postcards? Do you provide anything, and how does it vary by audience?
Great questions. I really think it does depend on the audience. If this is a small audience, where let's say it's a group of potential investors and it's a small audience, I think if it's a thing that you're pitching, having a potential demonstration of it, I think is terrific. If it's a physical object, having the physical object there with you. If it's some software, having a demonstration model of the software would be terrific. If it's still in its thinking stages, I think having something to show them. You mentioned an infographic. I would actually think of it more as a sort of a wireframe model of what you're trying to create. If it's software, and give them visuals of if it's software, what the screens might look like. I think I mentioned earlier that visuals should be complementary, and probably something I should have said in reference to this particular question is that they should also be exemplary. So what types of things can you give to the audience that would show examples of what you're talking about? Visualization, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Visual of what you're trying to tell them is often very helpful. So again, if it's a thing you're trying to get them to invest in as an example, bring the thing with you or a demo model of it. If it's software, bring the wireframes. Bring something that they can tangibly see or hold on to. And again, to the checklist point, don't put all the text that you have on your slide. Don't make it seem like you're just kind of going through one item after another during your pitch. Make it a flow. Memorize it. Feel it. Make them feel it with you.
Great. Thank you, David. And Daniela, what is the best process to craft a mission and vision statement?
Okay. I think that it's usually quite clear when you hear someone presenting when they're not actually married to a specific vision or change that they want to see in the world. So, I mean, I guess before crafting it, it's making sure that you, especially if you're on a team of people, that you're all aligned. Like, why are you doing this? I mean, I've worked with numbers of teams where one team is doing this because they're really interested in, tech, and another team member is doing it because they're really interested in supporting change in their home country of India, and another person is in, So actually, before crafting, before being too worried about the pitch and the wording and whatever, that's really just getting yourself and your team aligned to why are we here? What are we trying to change? What are we trying to do? And so that might be everyone kind of writing out the answer to the question, why does the world look different when we succeed, right? And then making sure you're aligned, because that's a whole nother issue if you're not. And then the wording of that, I would say concise, shorter is better. Usually when I've been trying to pitch something or thinking about a mission statement, when I just trying to explain it to a friend is when it sometimes comes out in the best way, because I'm trying to make it super, super simple. I'm not trying to sell anyone anything. They don't have a vested interest. I'm just trying to, get them to understand what it is we're trying to do. And oftentimes they'll be like, oh gosh, yeah, that's it. That's what I meant to say. So, being patient with that, trying it out in lots of different ways, trying it out with different audiences. And then when that relates to you doing your pitch, I think it's really important that at the very beginning, especially if you're pitching a social business or a social change organization, at the start of it, sometime in the very start, I should know how the world looks different because you succeed and what exactly it is that you're doing to make that change. So, it is key that vision and that mission is really core to the beginning of your pitch.
Great. Thank you so much. And Jenna, how do you sell an idea when you feel that the public does not believe it is possible?
Another great question. I think that this has been touched on a little bit earlier, but you have to attach some form of reality to what you're pitching. It's easy when you're very passionate about your work, and especially in the kind of social sector, to almost take your social mission as granted. But there are so many passions and good intentions and big ideas that, is a totally different thing from it being feasible, realistic, or validated, which is what you need to get at and really have resonate with people that don't believe what you're pitching is possible. I think that attaching that reality to your pitch comes in either, at least I think of it as two kind of main categories. And it's once again a know your audience situation where one of the categories is this quantitative data, hard numbers, big figures. In KickStart's example, understanding that a particular person that you're pitching is very interested in and swayed by or convinced by data, tending towards the large numbers and how well they're rooted in best practice and good methodology. And that's something that for some people who are more concrete and think in these quantitative terms is convincing, and that makes it more real. There are another segment of people, or the other approach, that's this more kind of anecdotal, qualitative, personal approach of describing, a story of an actual person who's been impacted by the work that you're pitching and telling it from their perspective. So either you're going the big, backing it up with large numbers that are very well validated and formal, or taking the very personal, kind of emotional, representative example approach. I think in both cases, visuals are very important, and both are forms of evidence. It's somehow linking your pitch back to reality, and that's, again, I think often taken for granted with social missions that are saying, that just, of course, this is a great idea. It's about making the world a better place. If you can't make someone see exactly how, without making them feel that they're being told how, because, I agree that it should be kept simple, attaching this reality either in the form of the big or the very small and personal are the two approaches, and really understanding which one of those is going to appeal to your particular audience will enable you to most effectively leverage each type of data.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And James, we've been discussing in-person pitches. What advice do you have for presenting a pitch via email in an attempt to have the opportunity for an in-person pitch?
Well, it's interesting to move from being on the doer side at Lawala to being on the donor side here at the Skoll Foundation. And I think some of the techniques that we used at Lawala, I see some of my former peers using now that I'm sitting on this side of the computer. And that is, someone mentioned earlier, I think David was talking about always leave room for a follow-up. And so I see people just taking every advantage they can to just ask a leading question, to seek advice. Sometimes it works better than others, to be frank. And I think the biggest thing is making sure that you understand whether there is or isn't alignment with the funder, if that's who you're talking to or if that's who you're reaching out to, prior to being engaged with them at all. And some of that has to do, someone mentioned earlier, timing. Is the work that you're doing, is it ripe and well-timed with this funder's interests? So here at Skoll Foundation, we fund mezzanine stage organizations. We really like to see that they've done it and proven it, driven their innovation out to some scale, and are seeing it adopted by others, promoting it out into the larger space. Before, we only give out 5 to 7 awards a year for the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. And so we might be tracking 200 or 300 organizations in our pipeline at any given point, and knowing and trying to understand when they are timed right, when there's an inflection point either in the external world that affects their work that makes it more ripe, or when their organization has advanced enough with enough evidence, with enough maturity to make itself eligible for our criteria. And sometimes the way that email goes wrong is people are kind of pitching me out of the blue without really having, you're looking for that mutual benefit the same way that you would in the in-person conversation. So the easiest email for me to return is when someone has actually gotten it right, where they have the right understanding of their own organization vis-a-vis our criteria. And that makes the conversation a lot easier. Or if they know they don't have that they're just looking for genuine advice, and that's okay too. But sometimes our ability to pick up the phone and offer real time to people is limited just because the number of emails that come in just looking for advice is quite large, as I'm sure David would say as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And James, another question for you. How do you recommend that one request feedback in order to improve the pitch?
I wish that I had more experience doing that as a social entrepreneur and getting organizations that I was pitching to give me feedback because, again, sitting on this side, I definitely have ideas for how people could strengthen their work when they're presenting it to me. And one of the best things to do, I think, and someone said this about right-sizing your timing, if you have only 20 minutes with someone, really keeping your pitch to 5 so that there can be a real dialogue afterwards, and looking, specifically asking for, like, where do you see alignment with my work and your goals, and where do you see misalignment, and getting that feedback in real time rather than needing to necessarily follow up, but leaving enough time for that kind of discussion to happen. And I'm always willing to do that when people are here talking to me, but often they crowd out so much of our time that I'm almost left with no time to really give that kind of feedback in the conversation.
I would just echo what James is saying, that I think most people that you're pitching to are more than happy to give you some guidance or advice on how you did in your pitch. And I think it's both because I think we're willing to help, and I think the other reason it's a little bit self-serving. We always want to hear good pitches and hear pitches that are on point. And so the more we can teach and coach people, I think the better pitches we're going to see as we go forward.
I couldn't agree more with David.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James and David. And Daniela, what are the factors that supporters need to see from a pilot before feeling comfortable making an investment of time and or resources?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You're saying what are the factors that make a pilot that you should think that you might invest in it? What are the factors?
Yeah, so what are the factors that supporters need to see from a pilot before feeling comfortable making an investment of time and or resources?
Great. Well, I think that, first of all, high fives to that person or that team for actually doing the pilot and having hopefully asked for funds for that pilot. I think sometimes too often people are asking for, they're saying, oh, we're going to hit 1 million users, we're going to do 1 million things, and it's all based on kind of anecdotal research, or they say we've done surveys or they've done whatever. So just the fact that you've done a pilot and you have real data of real people giving you their money or giving you their time or making certain choices that align with your work, that alone is going to put you leaps and bounds ahead of people that are just pitching based on anecdotal evidence or surveys or, we've heard that this might work. So I think it's also important. I mean, sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, you can do a real pilot of the full product of what you're trying to offer, the full product or service. Sometimes, for example, my husband was doing work that it required a $1 million mill, right? That they had to buy, right? So you have to figure out a way to prove demand that is not just we talked to 100 people and they said they want this or they said they pay. So for a web-based application, it's easy. You buy $50, $100 of Google Ads, and you get people to sign up to your website that's selling a service that doesn't exist in your vaporware, and you show, look, we've had this many people actually say that they really want this. They've signed up for this. They're actually putting themselves on a list to buy. And then with other things, you need to actually get on the ground wherever that is, get dirty, and actually get more than just survey data by trying something out. And I think that's when people will really be able to say, okay, they know that this might work. They know there's a demand, and hopefully, and also it's just about how much you ask for from there. Making sure that you're realistic about what your next step is. You don't need to go from 1 to 1 million. What's your next step based on that data that you've already collected?
Terrific. Thank you so much, Daniela. And David, should pitches be different if they are a for-profit or a nonprofit? Are there unique needs for a pitch in both arenas?
I would say they're the same with the exception of the financials at the end. To me, we as a philanthropy, when we look at investments, well, first of all, we're only allowed to invest in nonprofits, but when we do look at philanthropy, we think of it like a venture capitalist would think of it. Again, going back to what I said at the beginning, why is this important? What am I going to do, and how am I going to do it? The only thing that's different in a for-profit versus a not-for-profit is that the return on the investment is different. In a for-profit, the return on the investment is a capital return, as well as to some degree a social return. In a not-for-profit, the vast majority of the return is a social return. So it's really just at the end, and so talking about the return on investments and financials, that should be at all different. Maybe a little bit up front in terms of the why, because the why in a not-for-profit is entirely social. But really, I think in many respects, in most respects, they should be almost identical.
Great. Thank you, David. And James, how do you inspire an audience to want to invest resources to actually visit the project in the field and to really understand the program firsthand?
I think it is really important to try to get people to come and see and feel what your programming is like. We all know that seeing work in the field and being present with materially poor people who are affected by the work that we do is really powerful. I think that it's probably premature in the conversation that often these pitches are introductory remarks, right? They are, if in the land of a relationship, they are a handshake, and we shouldn't rush to a marriage or a kiss, and a trip to the field is likely somewhere along the line. Please don't tweet that. But I think that you're looking to form a long-term relationship with people who might support your work, and this is just the first step. That's the first thing.
Great. Thank you, James. And Jenna, how do you communicate true impact or testimonials during a short pitch?
I'm sorry, I missed the, how do you communicate what?
How do you communicate true impact beyond just basic numbers or testimonials during a short pitch?
Oh, wow, that's a great question, and I think that that's always the primary challenge of a pitch is that it is by nature very, very, very short and has to be incredibly focused. So I think the best way, wow, that actually I'm a bit caught off guard by. I think it's coming back to one of my previous answers about attaching it to some form of reality. And you have to be prepared to know what the person is who you're pitching is looking for. So you know in advance what you're going to select out of all of the very complex things that you find very fascinating as somebody who's pitching, making sure that you know going in what's going to be most interesting to the person being pitched, and keeping it to that.
Great. Thank you, Jenna.
To do justice to that answer by keeping my own response very concise. But I think, always having an understanding of who you're approaching and what they want is the best way to speak to their interests. I don't ever have a single pitch. It is always informed by really gaining as much as I can in advance an understanding of the audience and what's going to be most interesting to them. That's a lot easier in person because you can often see someone's face light up a little bit more when you hit on one detail in the initial very brief overview than it does on other details. When it's over email, as we've discussed before, how that might differ, it's really about doing your own research and coming prepared and knowing what that person you're pitching is looking for at that time.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, please.
I think it's a good question in the sense that sometimes when you're pitching, there's certain facts and data or opinions that actually are better off not coming from you, right? So instead of saying, I believe that, saying, this is direct feedback that we've gotten from X, Y, Z, from a funder, from a customer, from a beneficiary, whatever that looks like. And sometimes there's also, if you're in a pitch setting, as the founder or the idea generator, it's sometimes easier for someone else to make the ask if there's an ask at the end. So you can, as a founder, of course, you're going to have to learn how to do that all the time, but it's sometimes a good dynamic of either being able to have different people ask for different things or to even use quotes and use feedback so that you don't sound cocky or, know-it-all, and you're giving the chance for other people's opinions to get heard.
Wonderful. Thank you, Daniela. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for all of the incredible expertise and guidance and lessons learned that you have shared today with our audience. This brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar. Thank you so much to everyone.